It's This Week in Utah Politics, and it's a very, very busy day. We are recording this on Thursday afternoon, August 1st. And joining me is the Tribune's Emily Anderson Stern. She's been extremely busy because we've had a very big ruling today from the Utah Supreme Court in which they ruled that a challenge to the state's near total ban on abortion can go forward from Planned Parenthood. Emily, can you walk us through that decision just a little bit and explain what it means?
So all of this goes back to 2020 when the Utah legislature passed a near total ban on abortion. And of course, back then, the 1973 ruling Roe v. Wade was still in place, which protected Americans' constitutional right. It essentially outlined that Americans have a constitutional right to access abortion. But the U.S. Supreme Court overturned that in 2022 in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. And essentially, they gave state legislatures the ability to make these laws around abortion, to ban abortion. And Utah's trigger ban immediately went into effect. Planned Parenthood Association of Utah that same day filed a lawsuit. And a few days later, a judge blocked the law. And so for just over 2 years now, that law has been blocked, and a different trigger law, which has an 18-week gestational ban, has been in place. So abortion is legal here up to 18 weeks. But the legislature...
And you mentioned the trigger ban, which is what this law is commonly known as.
Right.
And it is an almost total ban on abortion, with very few exceptions. And if you were, and like you mentioned, it was passed in 2020, with the anticipation that Roe v. Wade might be overturned, but they had no guarantees. And then when Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022 with the Dobbs decision, this went into effect. Now, this ruling does not mean that abortion rights are preserved in the state. It just means that this challenge to the almost complete ban that lawmakers had passed 4 years ago, that challenge can go forward in a lower court.
Yeah, and really just the only thing that the state was appealing to the Supreme Court was to lift that block from back in 2022 on the law, so that the near total ban could go into effect. And so that's all that the Utah Supreme Court ruled on. So the block on the law will stay in place. Abortion remains legal up to 18 weeks. And it'll go back to a lower court to determine whether the 2020 law is constitutional under Utah's constitution, not the U.S. Constitution that the Dobbs decision addressed, but Utah's constitution.
And as I saw, Utah legislative leaders were not happy about this ruling. They once again slammed the Utah Supreme Court for making this decision. It echoed a lot of what they said a couple of weeks ago when the Utah Supreme Court said that the legislature overstepped their constitutional authority when they altered the Prop 4, which created the Independent Redistricting Commission. And you were at a news conference earlier this morning with Senator Dan McKay, who was the author of the original trigger ban. And now he wants a special session to lower the existing state law from 18 weeks down to 6 weeks for the time frame that a woman could seek an abortion.
Right. And, he's asked the governor and legislative leadership to call a special session. I reached out to the governor's spokesperson to ask about that. And she essentially didn't give me an answer. She said that, the governor said that he's looking at all of the options. But his statement was very much, he said that he was disappointed in the ruling when he put out a statement, and that his office is looking at ways that it can, essentially restrict abortion here.
Well, we do have interim meetings coming up this month in just a couple of weeks, and that's usually when we do see these special sessions. And we already had one back in June. They were off interim meetings this month in July. So if it were to happen, you would expect it to, if it happened quickly, it will be in August. If not, it may be September or October before the interim is finished. But so you have to wonder just how outraged they are and how quickly they want to move to make this change. But it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on going forward.
Oh, yeah.
What was your take, or how did you perceive the reaction from legislative leaders? Because they once again really were unhappy with the state Supreme Court.
It seems to have, fueled their fury. They were pretty mad about the redistricting decision, as you mentioned. And again, they're mad about this. And essentially, their statements touch on the power of the judiciary versus the power of the legislative branch. And lawmakers feel that the Utah Supreme Court is infringing on the legislative branch's authority. And in a way that the Utah legislature in recent years has passed a number of bills to increase its authority,
Mhm.
and they don't seem to be too happy that some of that could be curtailed. In fact, even in this case, the Utah legislature tried to change court rules
Yeah.
to essentially target this injunction specifically. They targeted the language that a district court judge used to issue this block on the bill, on the law.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting part of this, that they tried to use their authority as lawmakers to head off any challenge in the courts, which is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government. But as you've said, the legislature has been giving themselves more power over the past few years, and most notably, that really started in the wake of the COVID pandemic, when you saw that in order to reinstate a mask mandate or to reinstate school closures because of a pandemic, it not only required the governor to do it, but it also required sign off by either the Senate president or the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and that just continued this trend. That was the start of this trend, where lawmakers, it wouldn't be out of bounds to call it an increasingly imperial legislature, where they see themselves as the ultimate power when it comes to setting policy for the state, and they need to be involved in every part of it. So we'll watch that going forward. Earlier this week, you also reported that Donald Trump, he's coming to Utah for a fundraiser in August, and if you want to go see him, you're going to have to pony up. It's a lot of money, anywhere from $10,000 to $500,000 to go see him at this fundraiser in Park City.
Yeah, for context, when President Joe Biden was here last August, he held it was a smaller gathering than what Trump's going to have, but he held a fundraiser too, and the price of that for admission was $3,300 to $100,000. So Trump is asking for a lot more money to see him here, which I guess isn't surprising. There are a lot more Trump supporters than Biden supporters in Utah. It's a red state, but it is quite a significant price. And I was Googling other things that cost $10,000. It's the same price as having to franchise at Chick-fil-A.
And the chicken at Chick-fil-A is probably going to be a lot better than the one that they have at this fundraiser, the rubber chicken circuit. And also, one of the reasons why the price tag is so high is there's a lot of organizations that are going to get their beaks wet from this. That money's not just going to the Trump campaign. Some of it will go to his campaign. Some of it will go to the Republican National Committee. There are state parties involved. There are other organizations supporting his reelection bid.
Right. And some of it goes, there's the $3,300 max that'll go directly to his campaign. Then there's the $3,300 that'll go to a recount account, which the FEC allows candidates to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it shows that the Trump campaign is preparing to possibly challenge results if he loses in November. And there will also be money going to another PAC, the Save America Political Action Committee, which Trump has repeatedly used to pay his legal bills as he faces criminal charges.
And those costs have been going down in recent months, and he's been able to put more money towards his campaign. You mentioned recount. We've got one ongoing here. We are recording this on Thursday, so we don't know the results for certain, but it is a recount in the Congressional District 2 Republican primary between incumbent Celeste Malloy and challenger Colby Jenkins. Malloy won by 214 votes. Jenkins asked for a recount, but his efforts to get ballots that were excluded because they had the wrong postmark, those have been thrown out of court. So when they're doing a recount, they're essentially just recounting all the ballots that have already been counted. And it's very rare for recounts to change the outcome of races, especially when you're looking at 214 ballots. If it was maybe 10, there's a chance, but it's very rare that we see this.
Yeah, and I mean, we've heard from Representative Malloy's campaign that they're pretty confident that this won't change the results.
Yeah, and there's not much more to say about that. It's just that it is a recount. It does it does bring some extra drama to the race. There may be a few legal challenges by Jenkins going forward, but essentially he lost by a handful of votes, and you might see the margin tighten a little bit. You might see more votes go in her column, but essentially this race is over and done with unless something absolutely catastrophic happens or and changes the result. Last thing, and this was a really great story from Julie Jag, who's over in Paris for the Olympics, and our own Robert Gerke, in that the International Olympic Committee is pressuring the U.S. Olympic Committee, and they're likely threatening to pull the plug on the 2034 Winter Olympics here in Salt Lake City unless Congress backs down from an investigation into the World Anti-Doping Agency. They're looking into a doping scandal that happened in China, and there's actually a provision in the contract that says the IOC can revoke the games for here in Salt Lake City unless organizers do not respect WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency's authority when it comes to governing these things, and if they have to repeal a law that allows U.S. law enforcement to prosecute foreign citizens who are involved in doping schemes if it impacts U.S. athletes or sponsorships. Now, that's kind of outrageous, but it just shows this tension between international sport and the way sports are administered here in the United States. They've got 10 years to work this out, and that's a long time. But it's also not a long time, but it just shows you sort of the push and pull between international sport and sport in the United States.
Yeah, and I think, although Utah was really, Salt Lake City was not really the only option when this was
Yep.
finalized last month, I think it raises questions as to whether or not the IOC is using Utah's Olympic bid to leverage Congress to go a different direction with that. And, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see over time how that develops and how Utah leaders react.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why they aren't doing anything about this with the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, well, that planning is already underway. We're sort of not on the event horizon of actually hosting the games yet, so there's a lot of time for politicking and this kind of pressure. And the last thing, and we wasted far too much time on this in the media and in online discourse, and it just once again shows the push and pull between values elsewhere and values in the United States. Utah political leaders got really, really worked up about a part of the opening ceremonies in Paris that they say depicted the Last Supper, and it had drag queens and transgender people, but the person who put it together said his inspiration was not the Last Supper. And there's just been a lot of online discourse. You saw Governor Cox complaining about it. You saw legislative leaders, and they are vowing that you won't see anything like that in the opening ceremonies when they come to Utah in 2034. And my response to that would be, I would hope not, because that's Paris.
Well, and also, whether it was the Last Supper or not, I think what that shows is also how Utah's Republican leaders view the LGBTQ plus community, and there will be a lot of questions around that as we await the Olympics coming to Utah 10 years from now. Um, Especially, as Utah has on the books right now a bathroom ban for transgender people in government owned buildings. And a lot of the buildings that will be built for the Olympics will likely be government owned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the thing that I found amazing about this whole controversy was that they got really people got really upset about that part of the opening ceremonies, and I did not hear a peep about the menage a trois that was actually referenced in the opening ceremonies. My jaw hit the floor at that point, and then I turn on Twitter, which was a dumb thing for me to do in the first place, and I always regret doing it. And everybody's mad about this and not the sexual promiscuity that was not even hinted at in the opening ceremonies. And I was really surprised that that tableau along the Seine was what people focused on rather than something that would really poke its eye in the morals of some of the more puritanical aspects of American culture.
Well, that probably goes to show that a lot of the people that were being really loud about it online probably didn't even watch the opening ceremonies. They were just piling on based on what they saw other people
Ding, ding,
say.
ding, 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 ding. But I'm guessing a lot of people didn't see it because you see it in clips, you see it online, and then it's filtered through your own bubble. But that's we've wasted more time on this podcast talking about it than we should have, and it was a thing for several days. So I'm glad that we've mostly moved on beyond that and we can start focusing on other issues. That's Emily Anderson Stern from the Tribune newsroom. Read her stuff. Great breakdown of that abortion ruling from the Utah Supreme Court at sltrib.com. Find her on social media. She did a great job this week, and it's always nice to run down the top political news stories of the week. And Emily, hopefully we'll be able to chat with you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bryan. Always fun to come.